Microphone, check 1.
Check 2. All right. So how's everyone doing? Happy PorcFest? Yeah. I'm just curious, satisfy my own curiosity. How many of y'all have been to PorcFest? How many of this is your first time at PorcFest? Wow. Welcome. Awesome. Good to see y'all. Welcome to the party. Yep. So according to the schedule, there's supposed to be 4 people up here. We knew one person, Alma Summer from Arizona, wouldn't be able to make it. She last week found out she's pregnant and is allocating her time and money to that situation, which makes sense. The third person, Lori Roeder, we haven't seen her yet, so maybe she'll stumble in at some point, but the perspective she might have brought in if she was going to be here would potentially be one of, a couple years ago being exposed to the ideas of liberty and then deciding to give her kids the option if they wanted to be unschooled or not. So they had been in government, gun run institutions, but so a couple of her children ended up saying, yeah, I'll opt out, and then one ended up going back, but and she's also gotten onto a piece of property that's owned by an oath keeper, and the neighbors are oath keepers, and she's doing some growing of food and some other things. So that's essentially the angle she might have brought to the table. But I think John will be able to weigh in on some of those angles as well. But for now, it's a pretty open, I think, format. John and I maybe we're just going to share some thoughts and maybe start a conversation. I know we all have stuff we can learn from each other, so then we can have more of an open format and a conversation. But the idea of this panel, it's getting from here to there, and the motivation for me to be active on the panel is just to maybe share some things that I've found beneficial for my own journey and learn from you guys. And I think if we all do strive to reach like an ideal where we're peacefully coexisting, or there's a mutual appreciation and we're working together, then we can achieve that more readily than if we don't have a conversation about it. So that's kind of why I'm here. I invited John Bush, obviously, to be up here. He's a good guy and brings a wealth of knowledge. So I don't know, John, if you want to introduce yourself and maybe just give some broad brush strokes and kind of go from there.
Sure. My name is John Bush. I'm from Austin, Texas. I was born and raised down there, and good to be here in New Hampshire, free state. Feels good. Feels nice and secure to see everyone so armed and openly carrying. We love what we're doing in Texas, but there's no open carry, and it's kind of hypocritical when it comes to gun rights. But I've been an activist for about 10 years now. I began to question the official count of what happened on 9/11 back in 2002, and that kind of led me down a journey, down a rabbit hole, and did some anti-war activism, a lot of education about the state of global affairs, and the conspiracy to create a global technocratic totalitarian dictatorship, which really informed my advance to libertarianism. Ron Paul ran for office in 2007 and brought a lot of people into this movement, and he introduced me to libertarianism. Then I was quickly turned on to Murray Rothbard and began to contemplate the prospects of a stateless society, and it had very much appealed to me because it just seemed so consistent. It made so much sense. Further on in my evolution, I decided, I accept the idea of a stateless society and the idea that we ought to associate through mutually beneficial voluntary associations instead of coercive monopolistic hierarchies. And I thought that, the philosophy is sound, the logic is sound, let's go ahead and give it a try. What better way to demonstrate the value of voluntary cooperation than to live it and to show that freedom really works, and we can associate, we can be happier, more prosperous, more peaceful, more fulfilling, more healthy, more productive, more cooperative if we engage in voluntary interaction and if we reject coercive relationships altogether. It doesn't have to be just a government coercive relationship. There's coercive relationships in the household and coercive relationships between parents and children, and there are coercive relationships between people forced into labor. Not like if you just go get a job making $9 an hour down the road or whatever. I don't agree with wage slavery or that concept. But I thought, what better way to demonstrate it than to live it? And since then, with a large inspiration from my fiancée, Catherine Bleich, we've done everything in our power and our ability to live a consistent life, consistent with the philosophy of liberty. And it hasn't been easy, and it's been a pretty radical journey. We recently founded a nonprofit. It's called the Center for Natural Living, and the mission is to demonstrate the value of voluntary cooperation and natural living in the areas of sustainability, family, and health by creating educational media and helping families to fulfill their basic needs. And we're exploring these ideas, and we're bringing these ideas forward. We're engaging in philanthropic activities, which I'd like to talk about later, the value of getting out in the community and helping benefit the community to not only make the world a better place, but also to demonstrate that we're not crazy kooks that ought to be marginalized and brushed off to the side or rounded up and thrown in a cage. We're also working on a reality show that I'd love everyone to check out on Thursday at 3 p.m. It follows our family in our quest to lead a more voluntary and natural life and the hardship that comes with it. We have a farmstead down in Central Texas, so I'd like to discuss today the importance of building communities, geographically concentrating, and then doing everything we can to become responsible for ourselves, our families, and our communities, not relying on centralized, coercive institutions. And I think if we're able to accomplish that, it doesn't really matter what happens with the state. We don't have to fight the state. We don't have to bang our heads against the wall till we're bloody and blue. We can focus on building something more positive, and I think that'll really turn more people on to the philosophy of liberty and help us all lead a more free life.
Thanks, JB. Just real brief, my background, I went to school for law enforcement and eventually ended up spending some time in the DC, belly of the beast, in the think tank world, and just sort of broadening and deepening my exposure to the ideas of liberty. And where I'm at now, I guess, through a couple of different projects in the past and just a lot of good interactions, I've tried to, take my views to logical conclusions more. But some of the broad brushstrokes that were touched on in the description of this session today, talked about language and fear and practical steps, connecting and things like that, which John did a good job touching on. For me, I do really think it's important. Ultimately, I guess what I hope some folks might walk away from this panel is just recognizing the potential that they themselves have as an individual. And, I was reading some Emerson recently, and he was saying, instead of paying homage to these societies or these people that have been, before, and focusing on that as the epitome of whatever, some ideal, why don't, if you recognize some good traits in this person or whatever, this deed, then why not, encapsulate that, or why not live it yourself, or because if someone was able to do that, then there's no reason, each of us can't do similar things or even better things, in terms of positive impacts. There is this saying, Mises has this quote, about people not being, I'm not free unless you're free. So that's another reason I try to share ideas. I think ideas are what's important. Ideas have consequences, and we talk about the government or the state or authorities, and I think it's important for those to recognize that those are just terms that are ascribed to groups of people that work in concert. They're just associations of people acting according to a bad idea. So the longer that we who value liberty continue to just say, oh, the government's doing this or the authorities said this, then we're sort of giving them some of that legitimacy that they want, instead of saying, hey, Joe Smith and whatever, how many of other people broke into my house and raided my house for an action that had no victim or whatever. I could say, what I'm trying to say is it's important to recognize that individuals act and they're responsible for their actions. So if we continue to say the government did this or the state does this or they passed this new law, therefore they have this ability to intervene in our lives in this new area, I mean, those folks only have that ability if we think that they do, if we grant them that legitimacy. So if most of us here at PorcFest, I think, value personal liberty and responsibility. So if we can, remove from our own lexicon those sorts of words, or at least unpack them in our own mind, and then, I think it's very powerful to speak plainly and, not just dress things up and say, oh, this new law would do this, but say that, it's just text on paper, and recognize that no matter what they do, it doesn't give them any more rights, and even using the term they, I don't like to do, but really just to empower yourself, to realize that, it's worth investing in yourself and those around you, and the more you are able to move ahead and live more freely in your own mind, irregardless of some of the potential ramifications that might come about, the more you empower others to do the same, and then the safer and, better off we'll all be as we continue to move that direction. So again, I think it's important unpack some of that language and to look past the fear. I mean, I've been in situations with my buddy Adamo or other folks when we've been out and been threatened by some folks with badges, and there are some times when you get sort of anxious. When I look at the first videos of police interactions, my hand's kind of shaky, and then I got a little better. I used two hands or put it against a pole or against my body, and then I got more confident in how to interact and communicate. So I think just seeing past that fear, knowing if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't be afraid of anything. And once we reach that point where that is the case, then someone might say, if you continue to do this, this might be the ramification. And it doesn't mean that you're in the wrong. It means if they're aggressing upon you, then they're in the wrong. And the more that each of us, I know it's difficult sometimes to stand up. It's a subjective line, and I definitely have decided not to push certain things at certain times as well. But the more we're each individually able to sort of continue to move in that direction, then the less these threats will continue to exist. So I just really encourage us each to realize that if we're not willing to take the step today for the ideas we believe in, then it's going to be more difficult tomorrow and more difficult for our kids. I don't have any kids, but for future generations. And we see where we're at now with I think this is a very timely issue. This kind of conversation, in regards to the growth and insidiousness of this criminal organization and their interventions and the fiat currency on which it's based and all these other things, the misinformation campaign. So I really encourage you guys to just continue to self-educate, question everything, and share ideas with others. And the connecting aspect, I think, is very important too, because it's one thing to be by yourself, say in the middle of Nebraska, where you might not know anybody in town that has similar views, and so you might feel isolated, standing up for yourself or doing whatever, speaking the truth essentially. But if you're able to online connect with some people, or even in your community, it brings you at least some sense of solace. And it's not that everything will be okay, but it's one reason obviously a lot of folks are interested in moving to the Shire, just the community aspect. It is a lot safer. For example, if you act a certain way in arbitrary political boundary A, where someone might say you're going to get caged for this, versus arbitrary political boundary B, where there's you and dozens of folks who, if a message goes out, are going to be there to support you. I mean, that makes a big difference, especially in terms of standing up for your rights and recognizing that if it's an action that causes no victim but it harms no person or property, then you should not have to justify your actions to anybody. And the more you can speak plainly and tell your story about that, hey, this is what I was doing, this dude came up or this lady came up and did this, and this is why I'm speaking out against it, then the more people will come support you, and we'll all be better off because of that. And pretty soon, the real criminals will be seen. All that status quo propaganda that supports that bad idea will erode away. So I just think it's real important to talk about ideas and to explore what makes sense for yourself and move in that direction.
Yeah, to pick up on some of the things he spoke of, there's a bunch of thoughts were popping into my mind as you went through that really moving stuff. There's a dichotomy presented in the description of the speech, which is encouraging individuals, empowering individuals to act not constrained by fear, but according to their conscience. And a lot of people make decisions on how they will interact or what actions they will take, what path they will take, based on two different systems. One is the legal system, and people decide, should I engage in this activity because it's illegal or it's legal? Will it get me in trouble or not get me in trouble? The other one is the moral question. Is this a moral thing to do? That's where I think we should try to shift the conversation away from whether it's legal or not, because we all know laws don't change our behavior. I think it was Robert Heinlein who said, I'll follow the laws when they're convenient to me, and when they're not, I'll break them. And it certainly doesn't curb politicians' behavior or the bureaucrats' behavior. If anybody's been locked in a cage or had their rights violated engaging in free speech, I've been locked up twice, and both times were for what I thought were First Amendment protected activity. You know that the Constitution doesn't really mean a damn thing to politicians or those who have the power of all the guns. Likewise, it doesn't matter to the people. But I think if we can shift the conversation to say that the laws, in a sense, are irrelevant. It's not about what the laws are, except for maybe natural law. It's about how we ought to interact with one another in a moral, ethical manner, where based on the non-aggression principles, where I like to have my political, ethical foundation on how individuals ought to interact. So I think having these discussions helps encourage people to move towards that. But it is really fear, I think, that keeps everyone in the legal paradigm. We make calculated decisions about what risk is involved with a particular activity. And as Pete was saying, you know, sometimes he'll go ahead and disobey the law or disobey an order, and sometimes maybe not because the risk that's involved. Sometimes people will take a plea deal because they're facing, you know, whatever, 10, 20, 30, a whole lifetime in prison. Sometimes people won't take the plea deal. It's all up to an individual risk assessment. And I know that my risk assessment certainly changed immensely whenever I started having children. I'm not always out on the front lines with Antonio Beeler seemingly every week to go do the cop watches anymore. But people have different risk assessments. And I think what can help us shift and everyone feel more comfortable collectively with taking on more risk is the advent of community and the growth of community and the importance of geographically concentrating with like-minded individuals. Not only like-minded individuals, but individuals that are willing to step up and back you up should you come under fire or come under threat, or even just life problems like your car broke down, or you need help moving, or somebody's in the hospital and we need help with A, B, or C. Having people that are together, united, can certainly help overcome the fear that is associated with the state, because it's really scary stuff, and they do nasty things, and very harmful and insidious, I think, was a good word for you to use. You touched on language, which is really important. This is something that I've learned in my police accountability activism. You know, it's one thing to rail against Austin Police Department, which is like a metaphysical entity. It doesn't actually exist, Austin Police Department, except on a piece of paper, because it is a municipal corporation, just like the United States of America is a corporation as well. The only place that it actually exists is this little piece of paper that says it's a corporation. Everywhere else it exists is in our mind. And so I think that we should strike the root, as Pete was saying, and encourage people to take personal responsibility. So if there's a police officer, an individual, a human being that does something nasty, let's not say, oh, well, it's Austin Police Department that's at fault. Let's say, no, it's Officer Jason Mistrick, the guy that arrested me and locked me up for a cage, or Officer Patrick Oborski, who locked up Antonio Beeler. That way we can encourage them to take responsibility for their actions. We might actually encourage the changing of behavior if we put enough pressure on an individual rather than a cop-out entity. Then when you get in that game, that song and dance, which I've been involved with for like 4 or 5 years on the political channel, it's always a buck passing, like, oh, there was police abuse? Well, you can take that up with the citizen review panel that was created by the police union contract. You should find justice there. Oh, the citizen review panel ended up not ruling against the officer. You can't even read their transcripts and their decision that they made. Well, maybe you could take it up with the city council. They're the one that oversees the Austin Police Department, and they're the ones that appoint the police chief. Oh, they're now passing the buck to the state legislature because the law says A, B, or C. It's nothing but a buck passing. So I say let's avoid all the corporate jargon and ephemeral entities that only exist within our mind or on a piece of paper, and let's strike the root and say, no, it was this individual actor, and if we have to go to this person's home or his church or his community and tell everyone what they did and how he's dangerous, I think that'll be more effective than us just chasing ephemeral things that only exist within our mind. Also, there's this concept that's called reification, which is making that which is abstract real. And this concept takes place, as I said, when we say, oh, it was the Austin Police Department that beat that guy up. It's making an abstract concept real and giving it a personification in a sense. It happens whenever people say, well, they attacked us because we're free. They attacked America. Public indoctrination centers in school, you say the freaking pledge every day. I can't believe that that's a part of what happens to most people growing up in this country. It happened to me, certainly. But it's an indoctrination, so people take ownership in this concept of America. They say, I'm an American, and when someone attacks America, they're attacking me, and I have a responsibility or duty to either join and attack back, or at least be upset and have some sort of remorse because they're attacking my system or my entity, whatever it is. That's not to say that we shouldn't, have compassion for our fellow Americans or those individuals that exist within the geographic space known as America. But if we allow ourselves to take ownership in this institution which has done nothing good, really. The concept of the entity of America, especially the corporation, the United States of America, I think it's done so much more harm than it has good, and anything good that's come out of this country has come out of the people and maybe the rugged individualism that was present at the founding of this country, although there's a whole statist side of that story as well. But going back to the language, it's important to see past the reification, making that which is abstract real, and realize that we're all just individuals. No one has extra rights. Badges don't grant extra rights. Official titles don't grant extra rights. Even titles like Esquire don't grant extra rights. Attorneys and these licenses don't grant extra rights. We're all on an equal playing field, and we shouldn't be treated differently unless people are treating others differently. Then maybe we should call people out, and maybe they should be treated differently. They should be frowned upon, or we should encourage their behavior by praising them and helping people. But yeah, smash through the language, and that's all I got to say on that front.
Add just to compliment what John said about, I mean, a lot of what we said, some of it what we said has been like focused on police employees and stuff, and at the same time of I would hope each of us sort of investing in ourselves and those around us, and having, you know, not just, I don't know, conversations that really are superficial all the time, like try to have, you know, informed conversations with people and, you know, talk about real issues. I mean, sometimes it might be difficult in certain circumstances or situation with the family or relatives or certain friends you haven't seen for a bit, but I mean, if you do think the issues that some of the folks here are sort of concerned about or active in are timely, and then it's probably worthwhile having a conversation with people that you care about, especially if any of them are in the military or police employment or any of those kind of, even, you know, government agencies, someone who subsists on the wealth taken from somebody else. I think it's important to have that conversation with them, and, you know, a lot of folks I've found might be open to considering like every other good or service being provided through consensual interactions but the one that they're active in themselves. So I think it's important as you educate yourself to become familiar with some resources, or at least, you know where to potentially point people, so when you do have a conversation with people, you know, you can point them to certain other angles. And also, if you don't know, you know, admit, hey, I don't know, that's a good question, I'll find out and I'll get back to you. Or, you know, another thing, you know, a lot of folks, when presented with these sort of concepts about complete liberty for the first time, and by that I mean 100% freedom coupled with responsibility, where we govern ourselves and we sort of police each other. You know, I have no doubt that if it became known that somebody here at PorcFest this week was randomly beating people up, I'm sure that would not go on for too long, you know. So we have like these internal checks, but generally, you know, we don't need to have a coercive structure exist to purportedly provide justice, you know, which is hypocritical, because they're first violating your right to stealing your money to then protect your rights. So I would say to compliment what John was saying, though, that we also should not just, I don't know, write off current police employees and current military. A lot of the folks maybe went in with good intentions, so we want to make sure we're not divisive and expanding the gulf or the wall that is perceived. You know, you gotta remind yourself that not just the gun run indoctrination that a lot of us were subjected to from K through 12 or whatever, but also the academy training or boot camp or whatever, and all the years of input from that paradigm might be, you know, how one's worldview is. So sometimes another worldview is completely different, so it might be sort of not given any thought, or it's not given any consideration if the person presenting it is hostile or like demeaning. I don't even like saying, like, you know, looking at either at efficiency or morality based arguments. Like, I like using the word conscious now, because morality, you know, I feel like it's subjective and everyone's is different. But if you say, like, are you acting according to your conscience, then it kind of forces that person to look inward at themselves and see, hey, are my actions aligned with how I really am internally? And, you know, I like, if I have conversations with police employees that are like sort of heavy-handed, you know, I always encourage them, like, hey, when you get home and you take off your costume, or you cash your check, or your wife asks you, like, did you have a good day, and you tell her you did, like, are you going to be lying to yourself? Or I try to, like, ask personal questions, you know, like, just put something in there so they might think about it. But like, there's, and also by doing that, by being like open to sharing ideas and having conversations, then it makes it easier for that transition out of those coercive institutions to potentially providing that good or service through consensual interactions. And so I think the more that we can continue to create those and point to those, through agorism and other ventures, then we'll continue to get there. But
I think there's a lot to be discussed about overcoming fear, because I think fear is a major barrier, even for activists that know what's up and that know where we ought to be going or have a general idea of what society ought to look like. There's a inhibitor. That's a boot stomping on your face, or being put in a cage, being taken away from your family, having the business that you worked forever for be taken away from you. Even just being under an IRS audit, I can imagine would just be hell. So it's that fear that I believe we need to overcome, and it's kind of like a paradox in a sense, because what will help us to overcome the fear is when more people stop being afraid and we all come to one another's aid. But there's something that's preventing more people from overcoming the fear, and that we're all afraid, which is totally okay and acceptable, and there's nothing shameful about being afraid. It's only natural, especially with what we're faced with. So maybe to talk about some things that can help overcome fear and help us move towards acting upon our conscience, because I know every time I pay taxes, which I do right now, and I help to found a 501c3 nonprofit corporation, which isn't wholly consistent with my philosophy, but it seemed like a valuable thing to do at the time to help somebody who's wanted to donate, and it gives people the opportunity to donate money and not have to pay as much taxes, people that are still paying into the system. But every time I pay, even though it's way low, like $20 or something, which is difficult for me to stomach, I just feel terrible just doing it, in a sense, because I did it as a person. I let myself down, but also knowing that money, even though it's minute, is going to contribute to oppression at home and foreign wars of aggression abroad. And just giving credence to the whole system that I ought to be rejecting, that I philosophically object. And it's because of fear that I do this. So I think it's important to try to overcome that fear, and again, based on our own risk assessment, to start marching the ball towards living in a situation where we can act according to our conscience, not according to what we think could potentially happen if we were to act in a quote-unquote illegal manner. And one thing that if we could all accept the fact, and my 5, 6, 7, 8 years as a conspiracy theorist, quote-unquote, and that's what we could refer to it, I'm sure you understand what I'm saying when I use that term, really informed the passion that I have for liberty activism, because I had a pretty deep understanding of the magnitude of what it is that we're facing. And I think it helped me to overcome some of the fear that was present in my life, because I knew if we don't step it up now and take direct action and change the way that we live and encourage others to do the same, there may not be other opportunities in the future. I mentioned the term technocratic dictatorship earlier. The technology exists right now to where, let me give you my analysis of history real quick. I see history as nothing more than a cycle of revolutions taking place where there's a power group, an elite, a ruling class that has the control of the reins of the monopoly institution. And what happens is they try to maintain that power, but then the people get all restless and they overthrow that order. But then they become the order themselves, which is exactly what happened with the American Revolution and Animal Farm. Yeah, and what's taking place now is we're in an environment where the technology exists and the control grid is being put in place. I sound like Alex Jones, that they could maintain that position of power forever, and the proletariat and the masses may not have another opportunity to take power for themselves. I don't recommend taking power from them. I recommend taking power back to ourselves and empowering one another. So that just helps to inform the magnitude of what faces us, and especially having children, that informs it even tenfold. But even not having children, I don't want the world to continue to exist in the way that it does, and I fear if we don't act now and change the way we live and change the way we think and change the way we interact with other individuals, we could lose the opportunity. Maybe it'll come back again sometime centuries and centuries down the road. Maybe there'll already be the singularity by then, which there'll be a discussion about tomorrow, I think, or later today. But I think it's of the utmost importance that we do act and take pride in that we get to participate in such a wonderful opportunity in history. There's a conscious shift taking place right now, and everybody that's here is taking part in that shift. And there's people that are putting this message out like crazy. Like Pete and everyone is just inspiring people to change the way they live. That message is out there, and the technology that the ruling class has, even using the term ruling class, is engaging in the reification that we talked about, but it's easier to to come and understand. The criminal gang, known as the ruling class, known as U.S. Congress, known as the Bilderberg Group, known as the Trilateral Commission, known as the EU Commission, they have that technology, but that technology is also being put out in the world for people to replicate their own firearms, like the Liberator, old Bill Domenico's got wearing on his hip, or Bitcoin, which now has the ability to somewhat anonymously transact across the world without being taxed or without having to go through a central bank. So I think it's important for us to accept the place that we are in history and take up the banner for liberty and write history, become history. The winners in the story get to write the history books, and maybe one day we'll reach a point where the mainstream of the people that exist are reading the history of that ragtag crew of people that were crazy enough to think they could actually create a free society, free of coercive institutions, which, as far as my knowledge, hasn't really happened since civilized society's begun. There's always been one class of people dominating another class, and it just seems to be so accepted. But now there's starting to be cracks in that foundation, so I would encourage everyone, even though it may be scary, just take pride and solace in the fact that we're changing the world, and we're changing the future too. And to me, that's a really beautiful thing, but it is very scary, but it helps to know. I'm not saying people should sacrifice themselves by any means or try to go out like some hero, because then you lose and your family loses and we lose because we lose a brother in liberty, brother and sister in liberty. But I do think that it's important for us to stay true to our values and do what we can to create an environment where we can live towards our consciousness. So maybe I'll toss it to you. If you could give any practical steps or advice on how people can overcome fear. You touched on it earlier. One of the scariest things is staring down at someone that has a gun, and that you've seen videos on YouTube of them beat the crap out of people. Expect that it could happen to you. Some people, they do stand down because that presence is there. Is there any advice that you could give for people to overcome that fear? Or maybe people ought not overcome that fear in certain positions because it could end up with them being harmed or put in a cage, which isn't always a good idea.
Yeah, it's a good question. It is definitely subjective to each of us as individuals, based on where we're at, our situation. I would, I don't have any kids, like I said, so I'm not if I get kidnapped and caged for a week for not doing anything wrong, I'd rather sort of sit on principle and let that example show than fund their operation or whatever. But I can understand why somebody not similarly situated would take a different approach. So I would just say, do it. If you might potentially end up in a situation like that, I would just say, like, first off, again, just like reaffirm to yourself. Some people say before you go and do a public speech, you could like look in the mirror and breathe deep and get ready for it. I mean, if there's a potential interaction, just like whenever, just sort of think about like what am I driven by and what is important to me and what sort of ideals do I think should lay a good foundation for our communities. And if the more you can act according to that, if you're getting confronted by multiple people that are dictating you to do something that you shouldn't do, I mean, you can look internally and find solace in the fact that, hey, I know I'm not doing anything wrong and this whole situation is ridiculous, and if I can have the courage, the valor, you might say, to stand up at that moment, then like you yourself, you stay true to yourself, and then you might inspire and embolden others to do the same. But I mean, to look past the fear, it's just, I mean, everybody's got to figure out what the most, I don't know, you can't plan for every scenario. You just have to I guess be true to yourself. The more I think it's important to do, like, not just hit the streets and do whatever, but like sort of ideas-based activism. And as John said, like sometimes now that he has a family, he might not be out on the front lines per se as much, but he's still doing a multitude of things behind, involved. And so I would just say, if you're to find your niche, to find what you're most passionate about, whether that's creating content or just having conversations with people around you, or growing your own food, creating the needs and wants that you and folks around you might have, and then potentially you could monetize that and sort of erode that legitimacy that the status quo operates on. So I see that happening, and those are like definitely things that I think are crucial. So
one of the biggest ways I think we can all overcome fear together is, as the description says, the benefits of connecting with others. And I'm a big proponent of geographic concentration. Of course, the Free State Project's doing it best. All right, give it up for the Free State Project. There's like 1,100. I saw 1,150 they mentioned here in the president's or the organizers' little letter at the beginning. That is a serious concentration of like-minded individuals, and those are people that come and render aid and engage in mutual aid for one another and are there for one another in social circumstances as well as dealing with the police state and the bureaucracy. We're doing an effort similar to that in Central Texas called Lone Star Libertopia, encouraging people to move down to Central Texas and engage in the liberty evolution. There's already a lot of activists there. There's a high concentration of liberty activists. We're also trying to encourage them to come together and network as well. They got the Blue Ridge Liberty Project, which is really geared towards peaceful parenting. They're in Asheville, North Carolina. There's a pretty good concentration of liberty activists in Phoenix, Arizona as well. I think Orlando, Florida has a pretty solid movement going on. But, you know, this is a budding movement. The libertarian movement, liberty movement in general, has been around for several decades. It's been around since the existence of any tyrant or anyone that tries to take away freedom. There's always been a group of people pushing back. But the modern incarnation of that, I think, is relatively a new phenomenon. And then it had so much life breathed into it with Ron Paul running in 2007. So I think it's absolutely important that while we are on this phase, if we have the ability to get up and vote with our feet, and if we live in an area where maybe there's a dozen like-minded people, maybe there's less, a dozen might be a lot for certain areas, then really strongly consider moving up here to New Hampshire. If you're in the Northeast, if maybe you have family in New York or something that you want to stay close to, move to New Hampshire. Maybe you're from California or from New Mexico. There's a federal dominated state. That's beautiful, actually. Or Louisiana, move down to Texas. Maybe you're there in the Midwest. Check out Asheville, North Carolina. Or maybe you feel confident in the place that you are and you have a network that may not be liberty-minded, but you know that you back one another up. I think that's important. As I've evolved and progressed as an activist, I've become more unattached from the whole concept of a liberty movement or someone being a libertarian. And for me, it's just if they're a good person or not. If, you know, pardon my French, but it's the metric for me is whether or not they're an asshole. That's the big metric for the movement that I want to be a part of. I don't want to associate with assholes or jerks, and sometimes assholes are people that think it's okay to force people to do things against their will and that condone that and support it. But the geographic concentration of individuals, I believe, is one of the most important things that we can do if we are to find freedom in our lifetime, or if not, at least not in 100% freedom I'm referring to in our lifetime, perhaps in the next generation's lifetime or the generation after that. Or maybe at least hopefully by that next generation. But regardless, it's a multi-generational battle, and the first thing that you can do, in my opinion, is geographically concentrate. So for those people that are on the fence and you're here at the Free State Project, Porcupine Freedom Festival, maybe considering moving to New Hampshire, please just do it. Do it. Your life will benefit so much. Your freedom will benefit immensely from that. And there is genuinely strength in numbers. If you're standing up against a police force, which some of these cop watches, like the one y'all did a big one in Manchester, you know, and it's almost matching numbers with numbers, the number of police officers to the number of people in the community. That's a very powerful thing, and it's encouraging. It makes you feel stronger, makes you feel taller and bolder when you have your crew behind you, as opposed to being all alone. And don't think for a second that the police officers don't see there's a crew there too, or they say, oh wow, there's as many firearms on the other side as there are on our side, and twice the cameras. Maybe we should change our behavior. Maybe we shouldn't pull the taser. Like the 420 rally that Catherine got arrested at, that really changed her life and caused her to shift away from fighting and more towards building and changing the way she lives. There were firearms matched there just about, and they were about to mace, what's his name? He was arrested. He sat in front of the car at that event. He was about to get maced, but Catherine yelled, "Do not mace him!" And the cop quickly put the mace away. If he was there alone doing something like that, or if it wasn't for people being bold and standing up for one another, he could have got maced. There's certainly strength in numbers. Antonio was relaying a story. He was arrested, I think, for the 5th time this year, or 6th time, in Gonzales, Texas, because they booted him arbitrarily from a court watch from one of our friends. They took his camera because he was recording how terrible they were harassing these young people that were getting truancy tickets and being put in the system, being charged hundreds of dollars. So they boot him out, and the officer says, yeah, get the hell out of here. You guys can't be here. I'll charge you with criminal trespassing and arrest you. So Antonio says, go F yourself to the officer. And the officer says, what? What'd you say, son? Expecting him to be like, I said nothing, officer. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done. I'm sorry. When he says it even more clearly. I said, go F yourself. And, of course, he gets arrested. But Antonio told us Antonio told us a couple days ago that they treated him like royalty in the jail. And they asked him, you know, what would you like to eat? Do you have any food allergies? Has anybody ever heard that at a jail? And the reason being is because Gonzales, Texas is a relatively small town, and the entire country, if not the world, were flooding phone calls to that jail. So they knew that they weren't just messing with Antonio Beeler, they were messing with hundreds, thousands of people who happened to be calling saying, go F yourself. But it makes a really big difference when they know that there's a community of people behind them. Imagine what would happen, this is something that plays out in my head, having children. I'm concerned of the state taking my kids. That would be the worst thing that could ever happen to me. And I think, what could we do to prevent something like that? Anything. Someone come in and hauling someone off for operating a business without a license. Someone hauling someone off for smoking marijuana. These are all equally terrible things that ought not to be happening. So what do we do about it? Well, you know, if you're alone, you just get hauled off. But what if we had so many people geographically concentrated in the same area, and we're all committed to the same cause, and we're all committed to one another, and we have a Liberty Bell network like Porcupine 411 or the Lone Star Liberty Bell that we have set up in Central Texas, and, oh, the cops are here, you call the people, you're all committed to one another, 50 people show up, 100 people show up, and they all surround the car. And they say, I'm sorry, officer, we're not going to let you take our friend today. You're going to have to take all of us along with him. We're peaceful people. We do not intend to use violence as a form of resistance, but we're going to peacefully resist, and we're not going to let you take our friend. And they surround the car. I mean, maybe they would send the SWAT team in and everyone would get arrested, but it's only a matter of time before you keep doing that and they start to realize maybe we ought to just leave these people alone for certain crimes. I would like to see an environment, and I think it could be a quick middle step to a genuinely free society, or at least being able to live in an environment where we're able to live our life without being forced to do things against our will. And people can live in a statist paradigm as well, because maybe it's against libertarian ethics or ideals to force someone out of statism. Just a thought. If someone wants to have a constitutional republic and pay into some form of mutual defense, that's fine by me. Just don't force me to participate just because I may or may not exist within a certain geographic area. So a nice middle ground, an area of toleration I'd like to see is an environment where us liberty folk can say, you know what, you guys can do what you're going to do, we're going to do what we're going to do. We'll pay for your institutions when we think they benefit our lives. I play frisbee golf with my brother every once in a while at the public parks. I'll toss a few tokens into the park. Maybe I'll even pay the gas tax and tolerate it. I'd rather not. You know, I'd like it to see totally be genuinely free, but if they insist on maintaining the roads, then I'll pay the gas tax. But I don't want to fund the monopoly police force that locks me up for free speech, that arrests my buddy every other month, that kills African-American youth that are unarmed in my community every single summer for the past like 5 years. I don't want to fund that. I certainly don't want to fund foreign wars of aggression. I don't want to fund the NSA PRISM system. So what if we could just say, look, when we want to participate, I'll pay for the fire department until there's a viable alternative. I'll pay for the local fire department. We just say, look, we'll pay for those services that we use. Maybe you can itemize the property tax in New Hampshire. I don't know. Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. Just don't force us to participate. And we won't associate with you in any way unless we violate the life, liberty, or property of somebody that's participating in your system. If we have free people on free people crime, we'll do it in our own our arbitration system or whatever network the victim and the aggressor or the community comes up with. Only bring us into your system if we harm one of your people, if we take property, or if we're suspected of theft. And I think that might be a path that there could be mutual toleration. Of course, if you create that environment where you're not locking people up for not having licensed businesses, then competition is able to exist, and there will be private defense forces that can rival the municipal police. Then we have an environment like Samuel Edward Konkin spoke about with his different phases of agri-societies, where now the masses are seeing, wow, maybe there's a better way to exist. Maybe there's a better way to organize society that isn't based on being forced to pay for something. Maybe I'll try to hop in bed with these guys. Those are just some ideas that I have on how we can get from here to there, but it all starts with overcoming the fear, which I believe starts with geographically concentrating and seeing the value that does exist within the idea that there's strength in numbers.
So we're nearing the end. I guess we should definitely open it up for some comments or conversation. I just reiterate, don't live as a reaction to other people. Just like live how you think best, guided by your own internal principles, and we'll work things out from there. Essentially, like we don't need to. There's a video Storm Clouds Gathering has called The Chain of Obedience, and he makes an analogy about what if Napoleon were in New York City today and he ordered people to go and kill some other folks. People would laugh at him, and that's essentially like without those decades of programming and all that like shackling of that sort of framework thrust upon you. I mean, today we live in that. A lot of people think the U.S. is free, but I mean, if you step back and you look at all the propaganda and all the things that have gone on, and the fact that someone may say you have to come to this place or else we're going to throw you in a cage at this time and we're accusing you of doing something that didn't hurt anybody, like, is ridiculous. So the more that we can, in each of us, see that and conclude that and then act according to that and just speak plainly. We don't need to be philosophers. We don't need to be economists. I mean, it's good to have these foundations, but just to know, hey, coercion's not ideal, and I'd prefer not to live in a world with that. So I don't want to interact. I choose not to support you guys, and this is a better alternative. But I think Antonio's going to run the mics. If anyone has any comments or questions, we'd definitely love to hear them.
Hey, John, you particularly spoke about this. I'm wondering if you can talk about, I personally see a real big tie between peaceful parenting and creating human beings that don't have that fear, which you're talking about us overcoming. Can either of you, or you particularly, John, talk about that?
Yeah, a quick note on that front. I think it's of the utmost hypocrisy for individuals, parents, to reject the idea that government can use force to encourage people to change their behavior and then use force on their children in order to encourage them to change their behavior. I think that sends a really inconsistent message. It's disingenuous, and children can reflect upon that. But if we raise our children in a way that they reject arbitrary authority from the get-go, then there never has to be a deprogramming process that we all went through if we were in public school, or if our parents operated an arbitrary authority paradigm rather than a peaceful partnership parenting paradigm. So if you are parents, or if you plan on having children, it presents a wonderful opportunity to advance the cause of liberty in raising your children in a manner that is consistent with the philosophy of liberty, which would reject arbitrary authority and reject coercion, which is so present in households. It's present in relationships between husband and wives as well, or boyfriend and girlfriend, or partners. So I think if we are to create the free society, what better place to start off with than in our own homes, in our own personal relationships. And if we can exude that and show how happy and joyful we are when we aren't trying to manipulate others or use coercion on others, I think that'll rub off on people, and they'll say, man, why? Like in New Hampshire, the natives to New Hampshire, many Free Staters are natives, but the masses that aren't into the liberty, they'll just be like, man, why is that New Hampshire Free State bunch so damn happy all the time? What are they doing that I need to get into? Because I'm upset all the time because I got to pay my damn bills and taxes. But I think, yeah, the best way to start is by looking in the mirror and saying, am I living my life in a manner that's consistent with my ideals and with my conscience, as Pete said earlier, and the relationship that you share with your children, the relationship that you share with your significant other, with your family, and with your friends, I think is the best place to start by demonstrating that. And you can prove it without having to worry about the state, because the state's not going to come get you for not hitting your kids or for not yelling at your wife. So you can actually live an anarchist, peaceful, mutually respect life and not have to worry about the fear that's associated with it, and demonstrate that there is value in this form of interaction.
Yeah, I guess I had more of like a comment than a question. Pete, you were talking about like sort of like humanizing the state and not sort of looking at it at this like all omnipotent cosmic thing that it is. And I think that it's also like it's just a great form of activism in, like, not just for a person to humanize the state, but just like, when a cop puts on that costume, they sort of do it to themselves, and say, well, I'm a police officer now, and I've got this different set of rights. And like when you're talking about conscience and like, asking them, well, when you go home tonight and you talk to your wife asks you how your day was, are you going to lie to her? That humanizing, that might humanize them just and make it easier for them to be receptive to liberty and not just yourself. Like, I thought that was a really great point.
Yeah, one anecdotal story on that, like that was, it reminds me of our Greenfield, Mass incident a few years ago. Me and Dame and I got arrested down there. We went down there, Bill, some friends out. We got arrested for filming, and one of the guys that initiated the arrest, Todd M. Dodge, was very aggressive and hostile. And you know, the day after he had kidnapped and caged us, when we were being arraigned, he was bringing us in, and we said, you know, how'd you sleep last night, knowing that you put 2 guys in here for doing nothing and da-da-da. And he's like, oh, I slept real well, all smug. But the night before, one of his colleagues who was like closing the cell door when the whole time we're having these conversations as they're trying to process us, and we're just like limp, you know, they're trying to like do our ink and all this stuff. But you know, we had this, so we had these long conversations about their actions and how they're, you know, you're the one putting us in this cage. It's not this text on paper and stuff like this. And the last guy hung his head, and he's like, you know, he said like, I'm with you more than you know. And I said, man, if you're with us, you wouldn't be putting us in these cages now. And he's like, well, my family wouldn't understand. And I said, you know, well, ultimately you have to do what you think best, and if your family loves you, they're going to want to understand, and if they don't, then so be it. But ultimately you have to do, you know, act according to what you think best, man. So the more we can create these scenarios where that's the case and have these conversations with folks, I mean, there's a high turnover rate the first few years of police employees who leave that institution recognizing the perverse incentives in that environment. So I mean, the more we can have these conversations, I think the better off we'll be. But
I just also wanted to comment on that, how brilliant it is to say, is this the way you really want to be, like consciously, because it's so dangerous to have that dissociation, like I'm going to be this person when I'm in a uniform, and I'm not even going to think about it when I'm at home. And that's all.
Yeah, so the more we can question like this claims of sovereign immunity and acting under color of law and all these legalese fictions, and just point out, hey, this is ridiculous to other people, then they can see, hey, this is ridiculous. They don't have these extra rights.
Hey guys, good job up there. You were talking about homesteading a little bit. I just want to say that I think all the New Hampshire people should be buying up property as fast as you can. I'm planning to buy a farm as well and do a little bit of growing my own food. So, but speak about growing food if you would.
Yeah, we have a 2.4 acre homestead. We're renting. I'd like to buy the property. And we have over 100 chickens. We have a kitchen garden that has like 10 raised bed gardens. We just built a 17 mound hugelkultur garden, which is a way to grow food by putting rotting wood underneath a garden bed. It creates nutrients, and it also helps retain moisture, which is a problem we have down in Texas. And we use our eggs, the excess eggs that we don't eat, as barter and as currency, as a medium of exchange. So it's great. You know, Ben Bernanke, helicopter, is he still the Fed chief? I hear they wanted to bring in like Robert Rubin or Summers or one of those goons. They have their printing press where they print dollars. Well, we have our printing machine out in the back in the barn, and it's just popping out currency. And we trade chickens that we slaughter as well. Like we got our baby pictures for our newborn by trading a slaughtered chicken and 2 dozen eggs. Freaking awesome. Don't have to even use any Federal Reserve note whatsoever. Chickens are really easy to use. So yeah, people that live on property, people that don't live on property, you get into small scale systems on the back of your apartment building. You can link up with the local community supported agriculture program, which is very alive and well here in the Northeast, Vermont and New Hampshire. People buying property, I think it'd be great to link up. This is something we want to do with the Center for Natural Living. It's called the Sustainable and Autonomous Communities Initiative, and we want to work to study and help build sustainable and autonomous communities. Not the Agenda 21 style government-controlled sustainability, but voluntary sustainability, living our lives in a sustainable manner, consistent with our environment and surroundings, and in harmony with it. But I'd like to link up individuals that share the same want and need to live on a large-scale property. People pitch in like $25K each. Me and Kat were seriously contemplating moving up here full-time a couple years ago. We want to move up here part-time and get a homestead, maybe spend summers up here. But we looked at foreclosed properties. You get 10 acres for $100K, bring together 5 families, everybody chips in $20K, build your own earthen homes for $10 to $15K each or more, or build a traditional style house. And now you have your own small sustainable community. You can work towards building, growing your own food, and And maybe I'd like to see it, my ideal, one way we can get from here to there is if we pop up a bunch of these communities all in the same geographic area and we all form a confederation, a mutual defense compact where we'll come render aid to a surrounding community should it come under fire from the man. But I think homesteading, growing your own food is of the utmost importance. And if you don't have the means or the time, some people shift their time in other areas, link up with the local community-supported agriculture program or a local farm and work with them, volunteer with them, purchase their food share program. And certainly growing our own food, eating healthy food especially is important. A lot of people are concerned with coercion from government and freedom from government, but they fail to recognize that we need to find freedom from chronic disease and freedom from fatigue, and we'll become better activists, and we'll just lead a better life and be happier. So yeah, homesteading for the win.
Yeah, I definitely see a trend in that direction. And myself, the past like half of April, May, and June, I've spent at Bardo Farm just learning some of the skills there. And yeah, like energy, if we can take care of our needs, like energy independence and food and some of these other things, security, then, you know, we can essentially ignore those folks and not live as a reaction and just, you know, support each other if someone happens to come under fire, do some damage control. But
yes. Hi, just to work on your last statements, I have to get on here and just let people know, stop at Site 59, Grafton. We're doing just what you said. We got about 30 to 40 activists in a town of 1,200. Most of them are voters. We need more, and we have greenhouses. We have one person. He's completely off the grid. Actually, two now, self-sustaining. We're making biofuel for sale. We got peaceful assembly churches. A lot going on. We have land listed at Site 59 if you're interested to see what prices go for. The thing is, to work on the last point, we have a society up there. We're all working together. About 20 of the 30 of us are active, interacting with each other. Anybody needs help, tools, machinery, we're offering free, helping, bartering, the whole thing up there. Thank you.
A couple of years ago, I started coming to these events and saw myself as potentially moving up to New Hampshire. However, after this past winter, it was pretty rough, and I'm thinking, all my life I thought about being a snowbird. And John, you mentioned maybe going back and forth. Is there a value in that type of idea as well? Because that's now my plan, is probably going back and forth.
Yeah, I see immense value. Looking towards the bigger picture, there's some Free Staters that are extremely New Hampshire-centric and think it's New Hampshire or bust, and any other geographic concentration movement is taking away from what we're doing. I reject that concept and think it's inevitable that there's going to be multiple free societies, and we can all learn from one another. And I think it's important for us to go ahead and start the path towards linking these societies up, whether we form trade routes, whether we form mutual. There's a lot that we could do technologically from afar through the interwebs. To help one another, like these phone call floods that Cop Block helps to organize, and that happens every time a prominent leader in the liberty movement gets arrested. It needs to happen every time anybody that subscribes to anything. Well, it'd be great if we could do it anytime anybody gets arrested for a non-crime, a victimless crime, but that would be the only thing we'd ever do. I think there's immense value. We should link up. We should think about confederating, too. A confederation of different... This is like the Hanseatic Leagues took place around the Mediterranean Sea. There was a bunch of different city-states, and they didn't form a central government and a central taxing authority, but they formed a confederation, a mutual defense compact. So it'd be great to see Free State Project, Asheville, North Carolina, what we're doing in Central Texas, the Phoenix guys, continue what we're doing, grow these free societies, then link up with one another and render aid to one another when we need to help each other out. So yeah, I think there's value in that. It may be difficult logistically, but freedom of movement and mobility to have multiple places. Maybe crap hits the fan in a particular region in the country worse than others. Maybe it's safer here. It could even be seen as a bug out spot as well. But yeah, there's definitely value in having that if you have the means to do that. It's something we're interested in exploring, especially for the summers to beat the 100-degree weather in Texas.
I've noticed that the times I've come here, I'm seeing people from different parts of the region that I've met in different functions that are all liberty-style movements, and they're here, or I'm meeting people from here there as well. So I think that we all gravitate together to different places.
the cross-pollination of ideas is crucial. So, wherever different folks are, they're up to different things, trying different. I mean, they may implement some awesome off-the-grid energy solution that seems to have a lot of potential that's replicated elsewhere and things like that. Definitely. I think we're about out of time, but appreciate all y'all's joining us and all your individual efforts. So thank you.